perfetto, grazie. No.
Abbiamo mutato.
Ok, perfetto. Buongiorno a tutti, benvenuti a tutti. Comincio en lengua italiana, ma anche en lengua española, porque tenemos un buen grupo de mexicanos a los cuales, como Universidad Bicocca, les podemos dar la bienvenida. Nos da mucho gusto que estén aquí in questa inaugurazione della cattedra, la terza edizione della cattedra Messico-Italia su diritti umani da una prospettiva universitaria, che in questa occasione l'argomento sarà povertà, vulnerabilità e diritti umani da una prospettiva interdisciplinare. Cedo la parola al nostro magnifico rettore Marco Emilio Orlandi.
Grazie. Purtroppo ammetto di non sapere lo spagnolo, quindi devo andare in italiano, che è meglio dell'inglese. Allora, innanzitutto sono molto contento di essere qui e ringrazio tutti i presenti, la console e l'ambasciatore messicano per essere qui con noi, la collega Tercera. Sono molto contento perché è la mia prima volta, ma è la terza volta che c'è questa cerimonia per cui l'Università di Milano Bicocca ha questa cattedra che per noi è molto importante, e è molto importante primo perché per noi avere dei rapporti internazionali così significativi con una nazione è veramente un punto rilevante di quello che sarà il nostro futuro, perché siamo un'università giovane, per chi non lo sa, siamo nati 26 anni fa, ma in 26 anni abbiamo ottenuto degli ottimi risultati. Abbiamo 8 dipartimenti di eccellenza su 14, 37.000 studenti. Quando siamo partiti ne avevamo meno di 10.000, 1.300 docenti, oltre 100 corsi di laurea. E quindi, visto che ci siamo consolidati, per noi l'apertura con avere dei rapporti internazionali diventa assolutamente fondamentale. E questo è un evento quindi per noi molto importante. Ma è molto importante anche l'argomento di questa cattedra. Mai come in questo momento storico è assolutamente fondamentale parlare di diritti internazionali, specie a livello internazionale. Quindi sia perché è importante avere dei rapporti internazionali, sia per l'argomento della cattedra, avere questa cerimonia per me è molto importante, così come è anche importante poi la firma di un ulteriore accordo con un'università messicana. Ringrazio il Dipartimento di Statistica che ci ha portato, diciamo, in dote tutta una serie di relazioni che sono state finora molto proficue, ma sono fermamente convinto che nel futuro saranno ancora più proficue. Per noi, come si diceva, l'internazionalizzazione è un punto fondamentale. Ci stiamo attrezzando per avere sempre più studenti internazionali, ne parlavamo prima. Sappiamo che Milano è una città molto attrattiva. Ammetto che a livello di affitti è un po' cara, ma ci stiamo attrezzando anche per cercare di offrire delle buone condizioni a tutti gli studenti internazionali che vorranno venire a studiare da noi. Quindi non vi rubo altro tempo, grazie ancora a tutti per essere venuti, grazie all'ambasciatore e al console, e direi che possiamo iniziare i lavori. Grazie a tutti.
Grazie mille, signor magnifico rettore, per le sue parole di benvenuto che ci incentivano ad andare avanti su questi rapporti internazionali. E passo la parola all'ambasciatore designato del México en Italia, Genaro Lozano Valencia. Es un gusto tener aquí con nosotros al embajador designado Genaro Lozano Valencia, que llegó esta mañana de Roma para acompañarnos en esta inauguración de la Cátedra México-Italia, que cuenta con el apoyo constante desde un principio de la Embajada de México en Italia. Gracias, señor embajador. Le cedo la palabra.
Grazie Ana Maria e muy buenos días a todas e a todos. Sono molto emozionato di essere qui questa mattina, signor Rettore Marco Orlando, Console Generale, cara Maria Los Angeles, direttrice Laura Tercera, docenti, ricercatori, ricercatrice di entrambe le università, studentesse e studenti collegati dal Messico e dall'Italia, amiche e amici. Come dicevo, sono veramente emozionato di essere questa mattina all'Università di Milano Bicocca insieme a tutti e tutte voi e di avere il grande onore di prendere la parola in questa occasione che segna il terzo capitolo di collaborazione accademica tra l'Università Iberoamericana e l'Università di Milano Bicocca. In qualità di rappresentante della Presidenta del Messico, Claudia Sheinbaum, e del popolo messicano qui in Italia, mi fa particolarmente piacere vedere che si rafforzano gli scambi accademici tra due delle università più prestigiose dei nostri paesi. Come ha scritto la poetessa Gabriela Mistral, dove c'è un alunno, lì c'è una patria. E dunque, oggi qui abbiamo due patrie condivise, quella della cultura, della ricerca e dell'impegno comune a formare nuove generazioni di professionisti e professioniste con un profondo senso di responsabilità sociale. Questa cattedra, dedicata ai diritti umani, alla povertà e alla vulnerabilità, rappresenta non solo un ponte tra due istituzioni, ma anche un impegno condiviso a comprendere a fondo e trasformare alcune delle realtà più urgenti del nostro tempo. Desidero ringraziare profondamente il corpo docente di entrambe le università per la loro generosità intellettuale e per la loro passione nel formare nuove generazioni di pensatrici e pensatori critici. Come dicevo, sono particolarmente emozionato oggi, specialmente perché insegno all'Università Iberoamericana dal 2007. Ho trascorso quasi 20 anni a questa università, il periodo più lungo della mia vita professionale, come docente alla Ibero Santa Fe, e sono molto lieto di dire che trovo questa mattina algunos de mis queridas y queridos colegas, a mi ex jefa también en la Ibero. Valeria, ¿cómo estás? Allora mi fa tantissimo piacere, mi dà moltissimo gusto che estén aquí. Un ringraziamento particolare va alle studentesse e agli studenti che ci seguono dal Messico e la vostra presenza nos recuerda que los conocimientos y el aprendizaje no tiene fronteras. Saluto con profonda gratitudine il rettore Marco Orlando, la cui visione e apertura rendono possibile questo dialogo transatlantico e questa fratellanza accademica. E so che sei arrivato da poco come me, caro rettore, allora ti auguro molto successo. La cattedra tra la Bicocca e Ibero rappresenta un modello eccezionale. Nelle due edizioni precedenti ha contato sulla partecipazione di ricercatori e professionisti in numero equivalente, sia in presenza che a distanza. In occasione del primo scambio sono state organizzate visite a istituti penitenziari modello di Milano per conoscere da vicino le condizioni della popolazione privata della libertà. Da quell'esperienza è nato il tema della seconda edizione. Non solo si predica, ma si pratica anche, e questo merita di essere ampiamente riconosciuto. Desidero esprimere la mia gratitudine in particolare alla professoressa Ana Maria González, che coordina e promuove con grande impegno ed edizione i lavori di questa cattedra, e che è stata inoltre la prima docente di Milano ad entrare a far parte della rete dei messicanisti accademici e ricercatori in Italia. Questa rete, la nostra rete, creata nel novembre del 2020, conta oggi 112 membri, 59 donne e 53 uomini, di cui 9 operano qui in Lombardia. Approfittando della menzione alla rete, mi fa piacere invitarvi a seguire il secondo colloquio di mexicanisti e italianisti, che si terrà questa volta a Città del Messico il prossimo dal 4 al 6 novembre. Il primo colloquio si è svolto nel settembre del 2024 nel quadro della commemorazione dei 150 anni di relazione diplomatica tra il Messico e l'Italia. Il successo di quella prima edizione non poteva che spingerci a raddoppiare l'impegno e così questa volta la nostra associazione gemella, l'ARIM, l'Associazione dei ricercatori italiani in Messico, ad ospitare l'incontro presso l'Istituto Italiano di Cultura e la Facoltà di Scienze Politiche e Sociali dell'UNAM. Vi rivolgo il mio più sincero invito a seguire il lavoro attraverso il canale YouTube dell'Ambasciata del Messico. Cari amici, cari amiche, desidero inoltre trasmettere il saluto più cordiale del rettore della Ibero, il dottor Luis Arriaga, che avrebbe voluto essere qui con noi oggi, ma che a causa di impegni precedenti non ha potuto partecipare. Ricordo ancora quando alcuni mesi fa sono venuto nel suo ufficio per parlarne che venivo io in Italia e mi parlò di questa cattedra con grande entusiasmo e mi incaricò di venire oggi a incontrarvi. Il rettore Luis è comunque qui con noi, con il cuore e con la profonda convinzione che l'educazione, quando è al servizio della giustizia, può cambiare il mondo. L'Università Iberoamericana ha come missione quella di formare uomini e donne competenti, coscienti, compassionevoli e impegnanti, capaci di contribuire alla costruzione di una società più giusta, più inclusiva, solidale e sostenibile. Il suo motto, La verdad nos hará libres, la verità vi farà liberi, guida l'intera missione dell'Ibero e riassume il senso profondo del suo impegno accademico e umano, cercare la verità per promuovere la giustizia, la dignità e la libertà di ogni persona. È questo lo spirito che anima la collaborazione con l'Università di Milano Bicocca e che orienta la creazione di questa cattedra sui diritti umani, la povertà e la vulnerabilità, temi che, detto per inciso, sono della massima priorità perché guidano i lavori del governo della dottoressa Claudia Sheinbaum, prima donna presidenta del Messico. Con questa idea nel cuore auguro a questa cattedra una lunga vita di dialogo, di ricerca, di speranza condivisa tra Milano e Città del Messico. Grazie di cuore.
Muchas gracias por sus palabras, señor embajador. La ringraziamo di cuore, soprattutto per l'appoggio a continuare avanti su questa scommessa che abbiamo fatto di dialogo interuniversitario internazionale su questioni che interesan tutti quanti. Creo que son temas que nos competen, nos convocan y nos piden que sigamos estudiando y llevando respuestas críticas a nuestra sociedad. Ahora tengo el gusto, y lo digo en español, scusatemi, el gusto de presentar a la embajadora María de los Ángeles Arriola, cónsul de México en Milán. Y además de cónsul, quiero decir que es una gran amiga con quien hemos hecho muchos proyectos culturales tratando di unire los dos países. Quindi per me è un piacere che sia con noi l'ambasciatrice Maria de los Ángeles Arriola, una grande amica, ma anche amica di questa università con cui abbiamo fatto veramente tante attività culturali per tentare di unire sempre di più e fare più stretti questi rapporti tra i nostri due paesi. Credo che tutti e due amiamo tanto l'Italia quanto il Messico, essendo messicane. È a lei che cedo adesso la parola.
Grazie mille. Istituzionalmente professoressa Ana Maria González Luna e per me la mia amica Ana Maria. Grazie a tutti, ringrazio tantissimo all'eccellentissimo al rettore dell'università Marco Emilio Orlandi, rettore della Bicocca, per essere qua presente e dedicare questo spazio al Messico. Do il benvenuto anche all'ambasciatore nominato del Messico in Italia, che oggi ci accompagna anche qua, e poi vorrei anche segnalare che questa cattedra è una iniziativa molto importante che è stata creata sotto l'idea di unire di più il mondo accademico italiano col mondo accademico messicano nel 2020, con la presenza dell'allora ambasciatore del Messico a Roma, che ha dato una prima cattedra qua all'università ad ottobre del 2020 sotto il nome Le relazioni tra Messico e Italia, fatti, risultati e sfide. Poi la cattedra si è concretizzata nel marzo del 2021, quando le due università, tramite l'ufficio della direttrice della divisione studi sociali all'epoca dell'Ibero, dottoressa Alma Polo, e per parte della Bicocca questo lavoro è stato affidato alla dottoressa Ana Maria González Luna, si è riuscito finalmente ad avere un documento ufficiale che dava forma e creava questa cattedra istituzionalmente fra le due università. E devo dire che sebbene si sono create diverse cattedre del Messico, come diceva l'ambasciatore Lozano, questa è magari quella che ha avuto più risultati positivi, quella che ha avuto più continuità nel tempo, e non solamente è stata la cattedra, ma diverse attività che intorno si sono sviluppati tra i due paesi, particolarmente dopo la seconda cattedra dedicata alle donne private della libertà, che giustamente, come si diceva, si è fatto un esercizio di andare a visitare le donne nelle carceri, ma anche ha dato luogo a pubblicare un numero speciale della rivista Ibero dedicata alle donne private della libertà, giustamente in occasione della Giornata internazionale delle donne. Questa terza cattedra che terrà posto oggi coincide in più con un evento molto importante che si terrà questo pomeriggio al Consolato Generale del Messico, che è la cerimonia di rinnovo della messa direttiva dell'Associazione di Exalunni Ibero Capitolo Italia. Quindi, come potete vedere, l'Università Iberoamericana non solamente ha degli exalunni di altissimo livello, professori di altissimo livello, se non che in più hanno questa possibilità di creare un'associazione che va al di là del proprio Messico, portando una presenza internazionale del Messico, e devo dire che il capitolo Italia in più è molto attivo e con loro abbiamo tante iniziative. Voglio ringraziare anche la dottoressa González Luna per quello che ha detto. Effettivamente l'Università Bicocca e lei come professoressa italo-messicana è stato un punto fondamentale per i lavori di promozione della cultura del Messico in Italia. Lei è stata più volte anche involucrata in iniziative di dare conferenze su questioni storiche del Messico, che noi li facciamo anche sulle reti sociali, e poi anche il bello di farle così, che magari il giorno che noi facciamo l'attività poca gente si può collegare per orari di lavoro, ma poi chi ci segue, dopo un mese registriamo oltre 2.000-3.000 persone che si sono collegate, che hanno lasciato commenti, che hanno dato un like, e questa è la fortalezza anche per il City Book. La professoressa più volte ha parlato di libri pubblicati in Italia scritti da noti scrittori messicani, quindi il rapporto è molto forte, e mi auguro che anche a livello culturale, proprio nella sede della Bicocca, riusciamo anche a fare qualche iniziativa magari per il 2026 che permetta di far conoscere di più agli alunni italiani che, così come l'Italia è il paese che, d'accordo con l'UNESCO, ha il patrimonio culturale più grande a livello mondiale, il Messico è il primo in assoluto dall'Alaska alla Patagonia. Quindi abbiamo una cosa molto in comune, che è l'amore per la cultura, e in più due paesi molto sensibili all'arte e alla letteratura, e quindi oggi è un'occasione molto speciale. La cattedra, come si è detto già, di oggi si dedica particolarmente allo sviluppo del tema, scusate che mi sono persa un po' qua, ok. Povertà, vulnerabilità e diritti umani in una prospettiva interdisciplinare. E questo è un tema molto interessante, perché infatti lo parlavamo prima di entrare qua, che uno dei temi che si parla precisamente della povertà è quella che obbliga a certe persone a migrare dai propri territori e poi, migrando, portare sviluppo dentro del proprio paese, aiutando di questa maniera a migliorare le condizioni di vita delle proprie famiglie e delle proprie zone o territorio dove queste persone sono partite. Quindi lo sviluppo è un tema molto importante, e oggi avremo una cattedra veramente interessante. Grazie mille a tutti per l'ascolto e vi auguro una eccellente occasione. Grazie.
Cedo la parola con grandissimo piacere, soprattutto con un ringraziamento maiuscolo alla direttrice del mio Dipartimento di Statistica e Metodi Quantitativi, la professoressa Laura Tercera, per tutto l'appoggio dato dall'inizio per tutta questa inaugurazione. Lei ha partecipato attivamente già nella prima cattedra, la prima edizione della cattedra che abbiamo fatto qui in Bicocca. In questa occasione come direttrice ci ha aperto le porte, ci ha dato tutto l'appoggio necessario. Grazie Laura.
Grazie. Allora, volevo ringraziare prima di tutto i presenti, sono molto contenta di essere qua perché, come ha anticipato Anna Maria, ho partecipato fin dall'inizio a questa cattedra e quindi ho visto lo svilupparsi dei rapporti che ci sono tra le persone di qua e di là. Ovviamente in una funzione, adesso sono in una funzione diversa, infatti la prima cosa volevo salutare e ringraziare quelli che sono su questo tavolo perché fanno in modo che questo si concretizzi, e quindi a partire dal console Gennaro Lozano, scusate i nomi, io sono un po' sullo spagnolo non sono molto ferrata, la console invece Maria de Los Angeles, Ariola, e poi il nostro rettore Marco Orlandi. E infine anche la rappresentante accademica Graciela Turel dell'Università Iberoamericana di Città del Messico. Io volevo fare una breve genesi di quello che è stato questa cattedra. Questa cattedra è partita con un'intesa tra l'Ateneo Bicocca e l'Iberoamericana dell'Università di Città del Messico nel marzo 2021, e il cuore di questo accordo è proprio la parola i diritti umani, che poi è stato declinato nelle varie cattedre su aspetti differenti, ed è l'accordo che stiamo per siglare nuovamente per il rinnovo, ed è poi un accordo che, come hanno detto da questo tavolo, non è semplicemente una formalità, ma si è espresso proprio in uno scambio sia dal punto di vista scientifico ma anche di esperienze e azioni su tutti quei campi, su tutte quelle dimensioni che possono intercettare il fil rouge dei diritti umani. E questo è stato fatto tra il Dipartimento di Statistica e Metodi Quantitativi della nostra università e la Divisione di Scienze Sociali dell'Università Iberoamericana. Rispetto alla genesi, volevo dire che dopo questo accordo fondamentalmente ci sono stati due obiettivi fondamentali: quello proprio di avere degli incontri annuali, quindi queste cattedre, la prima della quale si è svolta, come sapete, qua a Milano nel 2022, nell'ottobre del 2022, 3 anni fa, e in cui in quell'occasione la lezione magistrale è stata tenuta dal rettore dell'Università Iberoamericana Luisa Riga Valenzuela, con un titolo, l'impegno delle università per i diritti umani. Ancora una volta i diritti umani che tornano sempre come centrali. In quel momento abbiamo avuto poi 3 tavole rotonde. Io mi ricordo che avevo partecipato a quella riguardante le migrazioni perché è il mio campo, tema scientifico, con i dibattiti che sono iniziati e in qualche modo le conoscenze che sono iniziate in quel momento. A questo si è affiancato poi 2 accordi di mobilità internazionale sia per docenti che per studenti, e come veniva ricordato dalla console e dall'ambasciatore, in quella prima edizione, durante una giornata di queste, è stata dedicata, con la collaborazione anche del Dipartimento di Giurisprudenza, alla visita al carcere di Bollate, quindi un carcere femminile, e in qualche modo in quel momento è nata l'idea di quale poteva essere il tema della seconda cattedra, cioè quella che si sarebbe svolta a Città del Messico. In particolare il tema poi è stato titolato Donne private della libertà dalla prospettiva dei diritti umani, e questa si è tenuta la seconda nel febbraio 2024. Un'altra in quella cattedra la lezione magistrale invece è stata tenuta da un'italiana, dalla collega Claudia Pecorella, che è una collega del Dipartimento di Giurisprudenza, e in quel caso ci sono state 4 tavole tematiche: la maternità e carcere, modelli di reinserimento con prospettiva di genere, migrazione e carcere, testimonianze dal carcere. Quindi ecco che è stata nominata ed è comparsa. Ed è comparsa. E quindi in qualche modo i diritti umani che vengono declinati a seconda anche non un qualcosa di precostituito, ma che in quel momento si è pensato tra la mia prima edizione quale poteva essere il secondo passaggio, il secondo tema. Dico che comunque l'obiettivo di favorire lo scambio sia scientifico ma anche di avere informazioni sulle azioni e sulle buone pratiche che nei 2 paesi hanno portato all'attenzione su queste tematiche e su tutti i suoi risvolti, che possono essere migrazioni, che può essere carcere, che possono essere differenze di genere. Questo ha portato, come mi è stato anticipato, a un numero speciale della rivista Ibero, che è uscita nel marzo del 2025 in occasione della Giornata Internazionale della Donna e che verrà presentata in una delle tavole che ci saranno in questa edizione. Quindi in qualche modo anche questo collegamento, il collegarsi come un lavoro che si sviluppa nel tempo. Dicevo che la firma di questo accordo da un lato quindi è questo scambio, ma dall'altro anche è il fatto di avere mobilità, cioè di sviluppare la mobilità non soltanto dei docenti ma anche degli studenti. In particolare volevo ricordare 2 momenti. Uno è quello della visita della professoressa Alma Polo del Dipartimento di Psicologia dell'Università Iberoamericano, che ha svolto presso il nostro Dipartimento di Statistica nel mesi di novembre e dicembre 2023. I risultati di questa ricerca poi sono stati presentati nella seconda edizione. Ancora una volta, insomma, questa cattedra cerca di collegarsi e non dimenticare tutti i passaggi che fa. Il secondo è il professor Giovanni Figuera, invece del Dipartimento sempre di Giurisprudenza dell'Università Iberoamericano, che ha svolto un mese, sempre nel 2023, nella nostra università. E poi, non da ultimo, invece, la cosa che mi sembra da sottolineare è la mobilità studentesca. Sono stati 4 gli studenti milanesi di Bicocca che attraverso il bando Exchange Extra UE hanno svolto un'attività di ricerca per la loro tesi finale presso l'Università Iberoamericana. Volevo poi, per ultima cosa, proprio per ultimo fil rouge di tutta questa esperienza, ricordare l'incontro dei rettori messicani italiani del sistema delle cattedre Messico. È organizzata dall'Ambasciata del Messico nell'aprile del 2024 e in questa occasione c'è stata l'opportunità di presentare l'esperienza di questa cattedra attraverso le parole sia del rettore Luis Arriga Venezuela, della collega Anna Maria Gonzalez. Voglio ringraziare sentitamente Anna Maria perché è il cuore da questo lato, diciamo, dell'accordo di queste cattedre, che si è spesa fortemente sia dal punto di vista scientifico sia dal punto di vista organizzativo, e non è poco, e quindi volevo personalmente ringraziarla. Dunque attualmente dovreste essere i colleghi messicani dovrebbero essere 9, almeno mi è stato scritto che sono 9 persone, li ringraziamo, li accogliamo e speriamo che sia anche questa una proficua esperienza e che possa continuare. Io ringrazio tutti e auguro a tutti un buon lavoro, un proseguimento di lavoro.
Grazie mille Laura, diciamo che sono la messicana che ha indossato la maglietta della Bicocca, se così va bene. Prima di passare alla firma del rinnovo dell'accordo, voglio ringraziare la presenza del prorettore, vice prorettore alla internazionalizzazione, il professor Gorini, la cui presenza ci dà anche più forza e più appoggio per andare avanti su questo. Diamo la nostra disponibilità, ma ringraziamo soprattutto la sua presenza qui, professore. Grazie. Cedo adesso no, vado dietro, se potete passare per la firma di questo accordo, come volete. Ellos dos. Y firmarlo. Firma, porque ya vienen firmados de México. Pues mandamos a México a que firmara el rector. Sí, exactamente. ¿Cómo lo había hecho Carlos? Ay, arréglame. Ah, sí. Que son un montón de copias. Credo che possiamo celebramos que el diálogo y la continuidad de la cual hemos estado hablando siga adelante a través de la presencia de los mexicanos aquí, a los que agradezco mucho que estén, y que sigamos trabajando intensamente en la investigación para dar respuestas a una realidad que nos está convocando y exigiendo mucho. Muchas gracias a todos por estar aquí. Grazie mille. Adesso passiamo alla conferenza magistrale della professoressa Graziella Teruel Belis-Melis, che farà la sua conferenza. Le cediamo la parola. Lei è la rappresentante accademica di questo accordo in questo momento. Es nuestra representante de la Ibero también desde el punto de vista académico para esta cátedra con quien estamos trabajando duramente desde hace muchos meses. Muchas gracias. Te cedemos entonces la palabra para che podamos passare alla conferenza magistrale. Abbiamo adesso la conferenza magistrale della professoressa Teruel Belis-Melis. Grazie mille a tutti. La presentazione ve l'hanno data, no? Sì. Ok, questa la lascio qua e questa anche.
Well, good morning, everyone. You're going to be very disappointed because I definitely do not speak Italian. So my conference is going to be in English, if that's okay for everyone. First of all, I would like to thank the university, Milano Bicocca, for your hospitality. I would like to start by saying that this chair has been very important for Universidad Iberoamericana. Our new rector, he came here almost 4 years ago, and he has pushed forward a model that is based on 3 axes. One has to do with formation, which is teaching, basically. Another very big axis is generation, which is basically research. And the third one is outreach. And we've very much have been looking forward to internationalize our programs and to look for, to push for internationalization and cooperation in research, which is basically what we've done in this chair. But we'll also, and this is someone I'm going to put on the table, Ana Maria, we would very much like to move towards including students. Maybe practices, maybe mobility, maybe coils, which I think is a way to move forward. So thank you very much for your hospitality. And obviously, I very much look forward to continuing this chair and to enhancing looking at other possibilities of cooperation and interaction between both universities. So thank you very much. So I'm going to start this presentation. This comes from a very long tradition of studying poverty in Mexico. I was part of the technical committee for the measurement of poverty in Mexico. And then I was also a member of Coneval, which I will be talking about in just a second. So we were responsible for creating the official measurement of poverty in Mexico. So I'll be talking a little bit about how this went by and how we officially established the measurement of poverty in Mexico. What's going on now, and what happens when we interact this official measurement of poverty with migration, specifically when we take into account remittances. All right, so this is more or less the outline that I have prepared for you today. I'm going to give a brief introduction first. Then I'm going to talk about poverty in Mexico, how it's measured, what's the official measurement. Then I'm going to be talking about what if we don't only use static measurements of poverty, but if we look at a dynamic way of incorporating dynamics over time in the measurement. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about migration, remittances, and its interaction with poverty. And then I'm just going to give some policy recommendations. All right. So maybe I will just lay out the presentation, and maybe we can have a discussion afterwards. So I hope it's clear for everyone. Okay. So Mexico is a country of big contrasts. You have a subpopulation of people living like in developed economies, very wealthy with access to all kinds of services. But then we have a very large population that are very marginalized, that they have no access to water, no access to education with quality, no access to health services. So it's very polarized in that respect. For a long time, governments have actually taken, the flagship of eradicating poverty, and there's been different social policies. So, for example, for 20 years before Andrés Manuel López Obrador, our previous president, came, very much social policy was using conditional cash transfers programs. And they were targeted for the marginalized, for the poor, and they were aimed at increasing human capital, specifically health, nutrition, and education. But if you look at poverty measurements over these periods of time, over the last 25 years, there was very little improvement in the measurements. You could see that even though these programs were there and they had taken place there was very little, if at all, improvement. These last new governments have very much pushed forward not conditional cash transfers, but just cash transfers as a main social public policy. So when looking at the overall trends of poverty in Mexico, the question really was, what can we do? What can we start to tackle? How can we start tackling the problem so that we can really eradicate it and solve it? So this is using income poverty only. So using income as the way to measure poverty, and this is the longest trend we have in Mexico, starting in 1950. So there was a big push at reducing poverty up until the 1990s. And then if you look after the 1990s and you stop at 2020, you see very little improvement, if at all. The numbers are very similar. So we have here two trends. One is, so there's actually two income lines. The upper one and the lower one. The yellow one or the orange one is the food poverty measure, and then the upper one includes all other basic needs. So, but in general, you see that only using income, poverty trends really didn't change that much in the last 3 decades. So, so official poverty measurement. In 2004, there was a new law, the new law of social development, that mandated a new poverty measurement. And why was this? If you asked in Mexico what the poverty rates around the year 2000, answers were from 80% of the population all the way up to 10% of the population. So depending on which academic calculated the poverty, the rates were all over the map. So the government first in 2002 established what was called the Committee for the Measurement of Poverty, which only used income to measure poverty. And so those were the first official poverty rates that we had. But in 2004, with the law of social development, the law stated that poverty had to be measured not only using income, but using other indicators. So that law created Coneval, the Mexican Council for the Evaluation of Social Poverty. And this Coneval disappeared this year, but activities are to be taken by the equivalent of the National Bureau of Statistics in Mexico. But anyway, Coneval really, what they did was established this new methodology for the measurement of poverty. So what was the mandate? The mandate was first to measure poverty at the national level and at the state level every 2 years. Then measure municipal poverty, which requires a lot of data and it's very difficult, every 5 years, and this would be using the census data. And then not only the measurement of poverty, but the other big mandate was to evaluate social programs and social policy in general. One important thing was to monitor changes across time. So to establish what the procedures had to be so that we could monitor changes over time, but real changes over time. So when would part of the methodologies had to change and when, so that monitoring would also be possible. And then also, so the measurement of poverty usually comes out to one number, but the idea was that this methodology would be decomposable so that we could go and delve into the methodology to understand what things could be related to social programs and social policy in general. All right, so this was basically the mandate. And so this is the methodology we came up with. Let me tell you that Coneval took 3.5 years to come up with this methodology. And this was because first, it was the first time that we had to deal with a multi-dimensional methodology. So no longer one line, no longer income. We had to incorporate many other indicators. So that was the first mandate, and it was not that easy. And for those who measure poverty and who know the technicalities, would know that there's one problem that has to do with aggregating all of the indicators in one single indicator, which is kind of difficult. So that's one thing. And so then what we came up is with basically two big axes. So we have in the y-axis what we call the well-being sphere, which is measured by income, and then the x-axis, which comprises all social deprivations. So what is in the law is access to education, access to health, access to social security, access to housing, access to basic services in the dwelling, and access to food. So that is in the x-axis. So the interaction of these two big spheres is what makes or what defines poverty in Mexico. So if any person has one deprivation or more, and the income of that person lies below a well-being line, it's called the LBE, then that person is considered poor. But then we have, in order to, I mean, when you calculate this, at that time, it was 2008, well, approximately 0.5% of the population lied in that square. So we came up with a lower income line, which had to do with access to food in general, like a food basket, the equivalent of food basket, which was a much lower line. And then we defined, and this was done statistically, not magically, if someone had 3 or more social deprivations and the income lied below this lower poverty line, then that person was considered extreme poor. So now, look at how the axes play. So when you set up the axis or the methodology this way, you have room for 3 other squares or 3 other quadrants. So we have the extreme poverty, then we have everyone else who is poor but not extreme, and they were called the moderate poverty, but then you have these other 3 squares right here, this right here. So these are people who don't have any social deprivation and whose income is high. So those are the non-poor. And this is where everyone wants to be. This is where the government wants everybody to be. But then we have these other 2 quadrants right here. This one is people who have no social deprivation at all, but the incomes lie below the poverty line. So those are called vulnerable by income. And then we have these up here, which are those that have very high incomes. Let's think of like a dentist or a doctor, which have very high incomes, but for some reason they have a social deprivation. Since they work on their own, they don't have access to social security, for example. All right, so this is the way the methodology was set. So these are the definitions. And then, so as I was saying, so it doesn't matter which pictures you draw here, starting 2008 and up the way up to 2018. If you look at all these estimations of poverty, they would look pretty similar. Very little changes, and there were lots of social interventions going on at the same time, but very little effect on the measurement of poverty. So this is, for example, extreme poverty in 2010. It was 10.4% of the population. Extreme poverty in 2012, it was 9.3%. Then moderate poverty, 35.8. Moderate poor in 12, 35.7. Very similar, very little changes. Non-poor, 19.3. In 2010, 2012, 19. 0.8, and the same thing with the vulnerables, both groups. So one of the questions that gave rise to this study was, what is going on? I mean, why aren't changes really kicking in if there are social programs targeted specifically to these subpopulations in the poor? So one thing is that given the information that existed in Mexico at this time and that Coneval used to calculate the measurement of poverty, they used a specific survey because in the law it was mandated that we should use information from the National Bureau of Statistics. So that information is a cross-sectional, and I will explain what it is in just a moment, but they lack information about transitions. So it's impossible to know if one person is in poverty at one point in time, if that same person remains in poverty 2 years after that. It's not possible given the nature of the data. So are people in extreme poverty in 2020 the same as in 2022? With the official data, it's impossible to answer these kinds of questions. So are people living in extreme poverty able to get out of poverty? Those are questions that cannot be answered with the official data. So what are the first objectives of the presentation that I'll be saying today? So based on these poverty trends, the following questions came to mind. So what are we doing wrong in terms of public policy? If a person is born in poverty, will they remain poor forever? Will their children remain poor, or they have escaped from poverty? Is there social mobility? And is there social mobility as measured by going in and out of poverty? Is there a way to get out of poverty? So those are some of the first objectives, and then others we won't have a lot of time to talk about, but I can, in the discussion, maybe say something about it, is if there is social mobility, what characteristics are associated with them? And what are the determinants that we could use in order to delineate a public policy in order for people to get out of poverty? So the data, and this is something that I really want to explain very well because this is, I think this is very particular, and it's one of, we're very honored in Mexico to have this kind of data, although we got cut from the funding to continue this data, which is very sad. But anyway, so the data that is used for the official measurement is the INIC, the Income Expenditure Survey, which are cross-sectional data. So this cross-sectional data is like taking pictures of Mexico at different points in times. So what we have officially is this collection of pictures across time. So what we're going to do is we're going to use something different, which is longitudinal data, which is data in which we set up a cohort of people at what point in time, and we follow them through time. So we're able to know what happens to the same individual along the way. Okay, so this survey is called the Mexican Family Life Survey. It's in English. In Spanish, is la Encuesta Nacional de Niveles de Vida de los Hogares ENVI. And we're very proud to let you know that this survey was done at Ibero and another university called CIDE in Mexico. They're two very good universities. And this survey won the first prize in an international contest that was launched by the World Bank for the innovation in statistics. And why was so? First of all, because it was longitudinal, but it was longitudinal with a very unique aspect, which was that irrespective of where people went, the surveyors went back and looked for them. So for example, we're able to follow migrants from Mexico into the US, and we interview them while they're in the US. So this makes this longitudinal survey unique in the world because there are very few surveys that track individuals across borders. So that's one thing. Another one of the characteristics of this survey is that it's multi-purpose. So it has very different, it has a lot of instruments, but basically I can tell you that, first of all, it interviews every individual in the household. There's not one single respondent answering for everything. So every individual is interviewed. Then we also collect biomarker data and health data at the individual level. So children are measured, blood is taken out to assess, for example, hemoglobin levels and anthropometric indicators. So it has a very strong health component. And also there's information about anything that you can think of, starting from migration to education to, I don't know, anything you think about, it's probably in that survey. So this survey, the baseline was done in 2002. Then there was a second survey collected in 2005, 2006, and then the third one in 2010 and 12. And then there was a fourth one, but that's where we got cut from the funding, and it was in 2019. And so that is like halfway done. So, but anyway, I want to talk about the methodology because the kind of information that you get for poverty measurement using this kind of data is much, much richer, and it gives you a different picture with respect to public policy. So this is the only survey in Mexico with the national, urban, and regional representation, and this was representation of how the country was partitioned in 2002. It's multi-thematic, as I was saying, allowing associations between welfare and different demographic and socioeconomic indicators and health indicators as well. And it's longitudinal because it follows individuals over time. So this is one of its features. It relocates and re-interviews the baseline sample, including those individuals who migrated from Mexico to the US, with a recontact rate, and this is really, I think, very impressive, of 91%. So we relocated and we found and we interviewed 91% of those who left from Mexico to the US. So there's these three waves, which is approximately 35,000 individuals at baseline, and it's growing to 40,000 by the third wave. So what we're going to do now is use this information and how we're going to use it. Instead of looking at each of the cross-sections separately, we're going to do two things. The first is look at changes over time, dynamics, who enters and who goes out of poverty. That's one thing. And the other thing is that we are going to create one indicator to look at an indicator of a long term, using these 10 years that have lapsed between MXFLS1 and MXFLS3. We're gonna, if we combined all of those and we looked at a long-term indicator of poverty, what would result? So these are two things that we're gonna be looking at. So, so this was tricky because obviously this is not the official survey to conduct the official measurement, right? So this is a different survey. So we had to adapt some of the things in order to make it possible. So the first thing that we did was that instead of using income is what is used in the official measurement, we use expenditure, which actually there's been a long debate within people who dedicate to poverty measurement, whether expenditure is much better than income at capturing long-term income. And so we use expenditure because it's much better captured at our survey than income. Income, there's a lot of missing values in the surveys in general, even in the INEGI or the National Bureau of Statistics surveys. There's a lot of missing values. and they impute the values. So instead of imputing, we use actually expenditure, which we believe is much better. We use the same criteria than Carnival for the rest of the social deprivations. So there's no problem except for access to food. Access to food, we didn't have information in the first 2 rounds. So what we did is we asked it in the 3rd round, and then we sort of imputed the first and the second round only for that indicator. So just so that you feel confident that we're not doing something very strange. So here are the statistics that come out. So the first 2 rounds, 2012 and 10, would be the official measurements, the ones that come out from the ENIC, the Income Expenditure Survey. And then we have the 3 rounds of data as we calculated them. And you can see in general that just leaving the access to food, which is definitely very difficult to estimate, everything else looks more or less very similar. So we'll be using this information with this methodology, same methodology as Carnival. So we're going to characterize different groups of people. So first, we're going to establish the first group is going to be called the chronic poor. So those are people who in the 3 waves were always poor for 10 years, never came out of poverty. Those are the chronic poor. Then we have the persistent poverty, which are those who were in 2 of the 3 waves were poor, and in 1 they were not poor. Then transitory poverty, they were poor once and out of poverty twice. And non-persistent poverty, non-poor, is those that were never poor in any of the waves. So we have all of these possible combinations. So chronic poor is poor, poor, poor. Persistent poverty, you could be poor at one time, and you have all these different combinations so that you can see here, and non-poor, never poor. Okay, so they're all different kinds of combinations between the 3 waves. So what happens to poverty dynamics? So we have, look at the first, this first one, don't look at the second one yet. So the first one is if we have the upper income level line. So how does these groups rearrange in the 10 years? So we have almost a 4th in each of the groups. A 4th in non-poverty, 26.6, in transitional poverty, 25, 24.4 persistent poverty, and 23.9 chronic poverty. So there's another way to read these results. So in 10 years, 7.5 out of 10 Mexicans have been in poverty at least once, which is a very strong result, right? And so that's chronic poverty, that is poverty as a whole. And then if you go to the second one right here, this is with the lower income line, which is the line that has to do with covering just food access. So that one, we have 70.7, 77.5 non-extreme poverty, obviously. And then we have, and this is very important. So look at that red square right there, it's 2%. Only 2% over the 10-year period have been in chronic extreme poverty, right? So these are, in a sense, much better news. Okay, so this is just to show you, because I don't want to go into details about econometrics, but this is just looking at a picture to see how many people were in poverty and were able to transition, right? So for example, this is the first wave. So this is how many people were in poverty and how they transitioned to the second wave and then to the third wave. So you have 50.9 people in poverty, but you have 17.1 moving out of poverty to vulnerability. And then you have some people that were in vulnerability here in the first wave, moving towards poverty. And then same thing here. You have people that were in non-poverty that moved to vulnerability. So it is true that there is mobility. There's no such thing as static poverty measures. There is people that are coming out and that are coming into poverty. So that's one of the big results. So just to characterize poverty here, and this is characterization by age. So we have chronic poverty down here. So who are more likely to be in chronic poverty? And it's children. Look at this. For example, it's 54% of the chronically poor are under 18 years of age. So children are mostly concentrated in chronic poverty. And then 7 out of 10 of the persistently non-poor are aged 25 to 64, which means adults are more concentrated into the non-poor. So very important here. So public policies target to children are very important, and they have been left out in general of social interventions lately. So schooling. So look at schooling. This is low levels of formal education are typically of the population living in chronic poor. So again, the poorest of the poor, they have much less education levels than the non-poor, which have or enjoy much larger education levels. Occupation-wise, same thing. For chronic poor, they have a larger share dedicated to agricultural or craft activities. And the next one is administrative activities. And this changes across the spectrum going toward the non-poor. So lower the agricultural and crafts activities, much less share, and much larger dedicated to administrative activities. So these are just to give you an example of what goes on. So first results with respect to this first part. So first of all, there's evidence that there is social mobility. People are not static. They don't only stay in one of the groups. Some people experience different types of poverty over time. So some people were non-poor, and then they were poor, or they were vulnerable, and vice versa. The probability of staying in one category is non-zero, and the probability of always living in extreme poverty is very low, less than 2% in extreme poverty. So groups classified according to Coneval's definitions are not static, so that's one thing. So if we keep measuring poverty the way it's measured, we're gonna miss part of this. Policies aimed at helping these groups may be focused only on short-term poverty alleviation, and they may not be focusing on these structural causes that would be more effective if they were taken into account. So, a significant percentage of the population is in a situation of permanent disadvantage, so the chronic poor, which is why all types of public policy action must be focused on supporting them. The number of households that fall into and out of poverty shows us the importance of adopting other types of public policies that function as a means of insurance against external shocks. So for example, those people who move from non-poor to vulnerability, those need, for example, insurance policies, insurance to loss, for example, of employment. So those would be like really good public policies for those kinds of people. So employment and income protection policies are needed in difficult times, as well as income supplements policies. So what does this have to do when we interact poverty with migration. So since we have information about the migrants who went to the US and we asked them how much they remitted to their families here in Mexico, we're able to add those to the income measures or to the expenditure measures in the survey and see how these poverty measures would change. So obviously, why is migration important from Mexico to the US? I mean, a lot of people here are experts on migration, Mexico-US migration, but we know that it's the largest corridor ever in any country. So Mexico-US, look at the migrants, the millions of migrants between Mexico and the US relative to any other large of crossings around the world. So this is looking at the number of migrants in the US. So it's very close to 12 million. These are official measures. And it's been very high ever since the 2000s. So this is looking at family remittances. If you look at this, it's been increasing slowly but steadily over time, and this is up to 2025. So it's very high. It's one of the most important sources of income in Mexico. And this is remittances as a percentage of GDP. So it's been growing up to the 21 and 22, it's 4% of GDP, and it's in 2023 decreased to 3.5%. So very important source of income for the Mexican households' remittances. So, for example, these are some of the characteristics of individuals in the US in our sample. So most of them obviously work, and the type of occupation is they work a non-agricultural worker or employees, right? So mostly construction. There's a lot of people in our sample that are in construction. Most of them are men. In MXFLS 2, it's almost 70%. In MXFLS 3, it's 57%. And I forgot to mention, there's just to show you the differences in wages. The difference in wages is huge. It's sixfold, 6 times more for the same occupation. They earn 6 times more in the US relative to what they earn in Mexico. So these are the figures without remittances, what we showed you before with the largest income line. And this is how it would change. So look at, for example, chronic poverty. Chronic poverty with remittances goes down to 22.2, which is close to 4 million people less in chronic poverty over a 10-year period of time. So it's a lot. It's 4 million people going out. And look at non-persistent poverty, 3.5 million people going or moving permanently to non-poor. So this is a great, I don't know if it's a social policy, but it's a great way to eradicate poverty. Obviously, income is important, and income coming from the family in the US is crucial, and it's very important. All right, so conclusions. So first of all, static poverty measurements hides information that is relevant for the implementation of appropriate public policies. So if we want to do public policies based on the information that we have, we're going to miss something. Longitudinal information is essential for analyzing dynamics. Cross-sectional data is not enough. We're very glad that the National Bureau of Statistics has just launched the first longitudinal survey just this year, so I think it's going to be good. Let's hope that it can be used for the measurement of poverty. I'm not sure. In the case of Mexico, private transfers, remittances are an important vehicle for the permanent reduction of poverty due to their size and the quantity. And migration from Mexico to the US plays a very important role, not only for migrants in that country, but also for the families that they leave behind. So thank you. So I'm here for any...
No, no, hay preguntas, ci sono domande, inglese, español, italiano, cualquier pregunta en cualquier idioma, para crear un debate o para que responda la profesora Teruel a la magnífica exposición que nos acaba de regalar.
Sí.
Muchas gracias.
Acá hay uno.
Sí, sí, sí.
First of all, my congratulations for this very positive and very clear explanation that you have given. Most important thing is the mobility of people from one level to another. This kind of measurement that helps to understand better poverty, because it is not only a question of economic ways of living, but also all the kind of facilities and services that people have the possibility to get. We understand very well in Mexico the importance of migration and when they send money to Mexico and how important it is in GDP in Mexico, and also the policies that the Minister of Foreign Affairs has made through the Instituto de Mexicanas y Mexicanos en el Exterior, while having these kind of programs that are 3+1, that means for $1 that the migrant gives for a program in its own community, the community will give $1, the state will give another $1, and the federal government will give another $1. So this had allowed to many of these communities to maybe have a school, to have a clinic, to have a street or a road that brings them to another community and can help that for development of trade between the communities, to allow children maybe to go from one community to another community to go to school and have the possibility of having better services. So that is why also the movement of this poverty can be seen very easy. I would like to know how much social programs have interfered in the change of movement of poverty, and what are more efficient, if the arrival of money coming from abroad from migrants or the social policies in Mexico? Thank you.
You're going to be surprised. Yes, thank you very much for your comment. I think it's a very important question. If you took from the official measurement, if you took out the social programs, poverty would be increased, like less than 3%. So if you had no social programs in Mexico, poverty would be 3% higher. This is with the last estimates from 2024. So these are larger transfers because they're specifically targeted for the chronically poor. The thing is that social programs nowadays, they're distributed everywhere across the distribution. First decile, 7th decile, 10th decile, everyone receives social programs. So they're not targeted to tackle the poorest of the poor. So that's why remittances are much more effective at reducing poverty than our social programs. If social programs were targeted only to target like the poor, the poorest of the poor, then they would have a much higher impact.
Yo también te felicito por la presentación tan impresionante. It's been a very impressive presentation. And I was wondering, following the question the Consul General asked you, What about the impact of the increase in salaries? I think that one of the most important factors that has made that has made possible in Mexico to reduce poverty. At least that's what the official figures also show. The minimum wage hadn't been raised. I can't remember the exact date. I think that it's for over 2 decades or so. So what's that impact? And also to ask you if you believe that having all these social programs that are not targeted as specific at the minimum of the poorest of the poorest is, I mean, that's your recommendation, but what if it's also seen as a way of distributing income throughout the whole society rather than just well, I mean, the most vulnerable, of course, but is it maybe the aim is to redistribution, which is kind of also one of the main objectives that both President López Obrador and now President Sheinbaum have as in general, let's say.
So thank you for the question. So these figures obviously don't take into account the last measurement, which is 2022-2024, where we do see a fall of poverty. And basically, it comes directly from wages. And it's basically not wages in general, but the minimum wage. So the minimum wage has been increasing, but the problem is that it's almost on its peak. It's going to be impossible for our President Claudia Sheinbaum to continue this policy, continue increasing the minimum wage, because the minimum wage is approaching the medium wage. So as soon as he gets to that peak, then just the market is going to take care of it. So so far it's been a good measure, but it's no longer going to work. So my recommendation is obviously to use what we can, which is social policy, because the rest is economic growth, and that we can talk about it, what things could be done in order to grow. But social policy is something that the government has as a feature. So that if you distribute it across the whole distribution, then you're going to be much less efficient at helping the poor. You're going to help everyone, and it's going to be quite nice for everyone to get something, but it's going to be very inefficient to help the poor out of poverty. Yeah.
Bueno, thank you, Dr. Graciela, for your presentation. It was fantastic. So I would have 2 questions, which I'm sure there are things that are in the data, but because of, well, time limit, maybe you could not see them in the presentation. One would be the gender dimension of poverty, what the data tells us about it. I guess that we see what we see in all Latin America, more women who are poor and women with more children being poorer and with less participation in the economy. But if you could tell us something about it. And the other is about children. So we see, and again, it's the same in Latin America, that children are the poorest of the poor, and we have an issue of inherited inequality. How does that change? Do we see changes in terms of all the different levels of poverty that you showed us by age group? Can we see children moving on the social ladder, or do they stay stagnant in a way? I don't know if I explained myself, but yeah, thank you.
So obviously, I don't have the numbers here, but it's more heavily concentrated in women. So women and women with children are much less disadvantaged, much less to the left of the distribution relative to those with men. And there's lots of parts of Mexico, especially those with migrant families, that men just leave, and then they're more concentrated with women. But then those, when you separate those do much better due to remittances than the rest. So if you like sort of like separate or divide them, then you get different numbers. Then children, obviously, as I was showing, are definitely those that are most likely to be poor. And there was a change. If you look at like a longer time span, children were starting to do better, and specifically given these social programs, the conditional cash transfers programs that were targeting young children and they were sending them to school, much better. And there was a slight fall now, given that there's not a lot of investment in education and health towards that population. So there's going to be, I believe it's going to get worse for that subpopulation. Yeah.
Gracias, Chele, por la presentación. It was very interesting to see the effect. So I'm interested in asking about, we know that about 40% of the Mexicans in the US do not have any documents, so they are in risk of being deported. We already know from the data from Instituto Nacional de Migración and also from the Border Patrol that less people is going into the US lately because they are very scared of what is happening with the Trump administration and what are the rules that they are putting in. So I would like to ask about what will happen when less Mexicans are in the United States. We know that for sure that there will be less Mexicans soon. So remittances will be affected. What will be the effect on well-being in Mexico?
Yeah, I mean, if obviously ceteris paribus, as we economists say, if remittances go down, then obviously poverty is going to go up. I mean, that's for sure. But I don't know, Trump is not going to be there forever, so let's hope that we can like wait a little bit and see what happens. I mean, the US needs migrants anyway, so I think it's going to be a temporary shock, and then I don't know, I think things will go back to the way they were. Yeah.
Thank you very much. It was very, very interesting. A bit out of the specific topic, but a curiosity about immigration from Mexico to Italy and perhaps vice versa. How is it? What are the trends?
I don't know. I don't
Does
think,
anyone know?
I think
Okay, well, migration from Mexico to Italy, well, it's a kind of different migration. First of all, Mexicans who can allow to travel to Italy or to Europe have another level of economic, social level and income. Majority of Mexicans, normally they come as a student. He, she, and me, we were students in Italy and in a time. Today, well, we are here because of our work, but in the future, maybe I will stay to live in Italy and I will be a migrant because my husband is Italian. That is what happens to many of us. We come here for like students, we meet our couple here, and we have a migration to Italy. In other cases, there are professionals that they come for a master, and after the master, they start first by doing research or something like that, or they have practices at a work, and then they change. Because here a problem that has Italy is that you need more technical people, well prepared, or high-level school prepared people, because here in Italy, even if you have very good universities, not everybody goes to the university. And then when you get to young age people to have new jobs, you don't find the force of labor. So many times, these kind of Mexicans that come and study here and they have high level of studies, they stay here because they have been taken by the companies to work in here. And then they stay maybe for the whole of their lives. And then it comes to the mix of both of them. Official numbers say that in total in Italy there are around 6,000 Mexicans. But this is not real. The real maybe will be double. Why? Because Mexicans then when they get married or they decide to stay in Italy after a certain number of years, they take the Italian citizenship. So they go out of the numbers of foreigners living in Italy. And then when you get married and you have children, for Italians, they are Italians. For Mexicans, they are Mexicans. So the number will be higher. But of course, if they were born in Italy, one of the parents is Italian, for Italy, they are Italians, okay? But the real issue is that Mexicans living in Italy, majority, 80% are women. Because also sometimes men for trip or women by trip, holidays, whatever, they find somebody and they get in love and they make marriages. And then they stay and live in Italy because it's beautiful. But there are also a lot of Italians that get married with Mexicans and move to Mexico, okay? But this is majority, the kind of migrants that you will find. And 80% are women, and from that 80%, a time around 20 years ago, it was 95% more or less. Today, it's 20%. So that means that every time more men come and live here. And from this total of women, of the 100%, around 80%, they have university studies. The problem majority is, and this is something that I would like to put here today, is that there is no recognition between our governments of professional studies between Italy and Mexico. And this is something that maybe our new ambassador, who is very linked to the academic life, maybe can help us to push. But there has to be an agreement to recognize
the recognition of Mexican studies here
in Italy and in Italy in Mexico.
So it's both.
We have to have, there are some technical issues that I will not get deepen in the discussion because if not, I will talk more and more. But the issue is that if there is no recognition of studies, then those Mexicans that could be a professional in Italy that needs young people with professional studies, they cannot work and they go and work as servants in houses, or they do jobs in restaurants or things like that because their studies are not recognized. Or they have to redo their careers in Italy to be recognized and to have a professional career in Italy.
That's something that we can start because we're doing this with Spain, actually with a psychology department. Maybe Sandra can tell you about it, but we're having these double degrees. So for example, psychologists, they weren't able to work professionally in Spain because they wouldn't have the degree. But now we're having this double degree with Universidad de Comillas, and so they're able to work there. So we can go forward with these kinds of agreements with universities. So that's definitely something we should put on the table.
There are, but the people that
Just to follow up what the consul was saying, the latest numbers I got before getting here, it was like over almost 10,000 Mexicans living in Italy, Albania, Malta, and San Marino, mostly of them in Italy. And as she said, it's very genderized. It's a lot of women, mostly women, who fell in love with an Italian. There's actually a book published by an Italian, Mexican-Italian academic called La Migrazione dell'Amore, La Migrazione d'Amore. That's how they call the migrant waves in Italy from Mexico. La Migrazione d'Amore, Paulina Sabugal, it's academic. Ajá, sí. Exacto. And the thing is that I heard, I mean, I've been only here for a month, but that's one of the key things that I've been listening over and over. People who came here and fell in love, and mostly women who have a degree from a university in Mexico, and that they cannot work here. And most of them have been in Italy for over 20, 30 years. They're fully integrated to Italy, but they cannot work. So we're going to organize a workshop at the embassy in the summertime, sorry, in the springtime, with some of the people that we have already found that they were very successful at getting their degrees recognized here in Italy. That's actually a discussion that the two governments should have at the level of the ministries of education to better make this, this recognition as soon as possible. No? I know that it's been tried before a few years ago, and I don't know what's the reason. Why is the reason it didn't go through, or it wasn't ended that agreement? But I'm gonna look at it again. And for the near future, as I said, we'll have a workshop with 4 people that we have found that they were very successful at doing that, and they can now work in Italy with their professions. A psychologist, there's a dentist, and 2 others that I can't remember their professions, but they're already working full-time here in Italy, no? Professionals. Yes, within their own profession, I mean. And yes, the migration in Italy compared to the one that we have to our diaspora in the US is huge. It's over 40 million Mexicans who live and work in the US and go back and forth. And in Italy, compared, I mean, that number of 10,000 people is really small, and it's also a more diverse and more also spread out migration. The Mexicans in Italy are all over Italy, and they are not well connected in between each other. They're not really a community. And one of the goals and one of the missions that both the consul and myself have is like to try to connect them and to make a stronger community, because some of them live in northern Italy, others in Sicily or Sardinia or in Rome, and so the only moments where they come to feel the sense of community are during the national holiday, during Day of Muertos, like sporadic dates along the calendar that remind them that they're Mexicans, even though they have formed families here and they've been in Italy for a very long time. No?
Okay. Valeria.
Thank you, Chele, very much. It is a big pleasure hearing you with your fantastic topic. I love that you present not only the static numbers about poverty, but you mentioned this shift from poverty to vulnerability, which is the topic of our cátedra this year. So how long can we see this shift from one layer of poverty to the other one? And what are the limitations that this provokes in recommendations, policy recommendations? And linked to this, I wonder what happened during the pandemic. What data do we have related to children, for example, access to education and access to healthcare? And what do you think about this new strategy of the government supporting the politics of care? Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Valeria. So these movements and in and out, they're everywhere across the map. I mean, you have people from any type of the groups going in and out of poverty. So the thing is, what social programs can be put into place to improve like more in a long-term perspective. I think that's what's important, but you need to understand what goes on with these movements across time in order to put the right policies into place. So during the pandemic, we didn't have this information, but we collected at Ibero as well a survey called the ENCOVID, just to follow individuals. We had both a longitudinal survey and a series of cross-sections every 2 months to follow individuals across time. And we found, for example, that we cannot measure mental health in children, but we did measure behaviors of children that could be related to mental health, and those skyrocketed. Those and mental health in adults just went skyrocketed completely. And also access to food as measured by Inseguridad Alimentaria, which is the official measurement used in the official measurement of poverty, also went skyrocketed and then slowly, very slowly, went back. And obviously income as well, income and wages. So those are, I think, the main effects that we found. But for children, it was very, very striking to see this change of behaviors affecting mental health of children and obviously adults. I mean, Sandra is an expert as well. I mean, it was amazing, especially of women. I mean, mental health of women went to the roof, and then it took, I don't know, at least like 2 years in order for levels to come back. And actually, the National Bureau of Statistics wasn't measuring it. It was not until we started measuring and publishing the results that they introduced a set of indicators in one of the surveys. Right. Care, we didn't ask about care. Yeah, we didn't ask about care because this was a telephone survey. Remember, we couldn't send anyone door to door, so we had to do a telephone survey. So it had to be like a 10 or 12-minute survey, so it's very hard to ask about care, but care is definitely, I mean, if you look at the ENOE, the employment survey, you do see care of women going up during the pandemic drastically and then coming down. And you see very little of men helping with household chores during the pandemic. There was an increase, like an hour or something like that, but not that much. Yeah.
Ma certo.
So just another question regarding wages and income and so on. Do the surveys measure if it's income by formal or informal employment? And is there a differential impact on social deprivation in that respect, especially, well, access to social security or deprivations, or does it impact on how poverty moves, whether it's formal or informal employment?
Definitely yes. I mean, I don't remember the numbers, but it's like half are in the informal sector. But it does affect directly the measurement of poverty because one of the social deprivations is access to social security. So you only have access to social security if you're in the formal sector. So definitely yes. So that's...
We can find it in the data.
Yes, yes, you can find it in the data very easily, yes.
I want to comment on the fact that there is a gender issue, obviously, because always women are the ones who move to the country of their partner. So we can see that's why there are so many Mexican women in Italy, and maybe that's also the fact with Italian women in Mexico. I don't know about that if you have researched that. I don't know, but I also want to talk about the Italian migration to Mexico, and because I think that was part of his question too. I don't know how many Italians there are now in Mexico, but I do know that the migration of Italians, the historical migration of Italians, Mexico was not one of the preferred countries in America. So there are a lot more migrants, obviously, in Argentina, as Valeria can tell, and a lot more in Brazil too than there are in Mexico. But there was a policy when my great-grandfather came from Italy. There was a policy about bringing Italians to Mexico that was in the beginning of the 19th century. So Italians were preferred for a little while, and they founded some communities. So there are some Nueva Italia in Michoacán and Chipilo, and that's the same migration where my family came to Mexico. So there was some specific movements of Italians to Mexico that we know about.
I think there are about 30,000 Italians
30,000. Yeah.
I was very recently at the Farnesina, and they showed me that there were currently, like last week, there were over 190,000 Italians in Mexico. But they were probably just like visiting and like holidays, no? Because the Farnesina has this system. I mean, Italians are supposed to register at the Farnesina when they go out, when they travel. So they had 180,000 Italians moving in Mexico that day, no? At least. I don't know how many of them were actually living there, or how many were like as tourists, but that was the number, the official number. And that migration that you're mentioning, that's also my family, my mother's on the mother's side also lived in Nueva Italia, Lombardia, and Michoacán, no, as well. So there's a professor who's doing like some research of that migration and published a book on the Orsini family, or not the Orsini, it's the I can't remember it now, but if I remember, I'll tell you, because there is a book about it. There's a lot in line too.
There was an old book that was called Los Italianos en México by Zilli, and then someone just told me that his granddaughter of the one that had written the previous book is working on another book. So that's probably the same one that you're talking about. I'm not sure.
I just wanted to talk on about the care. There, it's not clear if in Mexico. I mean, it surely it's not in the same way that with other population, but in Italy, there's a lot of Peruvian and Honduran women that come here. They come here to take care of people. And then they bring the family. So there's a diverse migration than in other because it's not for raggiungimento to go where the padre familia is, but it's the women that come here and to be take care, and then they bring the family. And it's interesting because in Mexico, the community of Mexicans that are here majorly are women that are making the restaurant. They are the ones that are beginning to make commerce, and then there's the family that comes along.
How much in poverty will it impact if there were more investments in Mexico on education for children? I don't know if the social program that I don't know if it's still working regarding feeding children in school, because that program was allowing mothers to assure their children to have at least 1 or 2 meals per day, balanced meals at school. And then that was a way also that instead of sending children to work in the streets or to support them in the house, or if they are in farms, to work in the farms that should not be, children were in the capacity to go to school, to learn to read and to write, and to give them a chance of development. I was 3 years and a half a part of the Mexican delegation to FAO and to the World Food Program. And in that time, when I was there, the policy of the developed countries, the ones that give the money for the programs of World Food Program, that is the United Nations program or organization with more money, more than the United Nations, they were changing from giving money for development programs, food for development. They were moving it for food, for aid, for wars, for everything. Then we made a trip to Latin America, and we went to Bolivia and to Peru to see their programs. And we saw mainly these ones that are food for development, making roads, making schools, making hospitals. And instead of giving a salary, they were giving food to the communities. And that was the way that World Food Program was supporting. And there were real results, there were impact in the development. So feeding children for me is one of the very important possibilities, not only to feed them well and then you move them from one of the factors of poverty, that is access to good food, and then the possibility of children to learn to read and to write. Maybe they will not go to the university, but maybe yes, we have Benito Juárez. So does that kind of social programs have a long-term impact, positive impact? Thank you.
Yeah, that's one of the things. I mean, you touched a point that makes me very sad, because I was a founder of Coneval, and Coneval just closed doors. And the second mandate, as I was saying, was evaluation of social programs and social policy. So much of what we did over all these years was trying to measure the impact, and this was by doing it very rigorously with methodologies that are very strict to measure some of these programs. And there was a clear impact of sending children to school, and through nutritional programs and all of these estancias infantiles, which were also closed, escuelas de tiempo completo, which were also closed, and which had a big impact in women going to work. I mean, these programs closed, and if you look at the evidence that Coneval produced, they were all very positive programs. So I think one of the things that we will lose from the closure of Coneval is exactly this, the evidence that was collected by evaluating. I don't know who's going to evaluate anymore, because INEGI, the National Bureau of Statistics, is going to do the evaluation of social policy, which is like very big macro policies, but not the programs themselves. So supposedly the Ministry of Finance is going to do these evaluations, but they're going to be from a finance point of view more than looking at impacts. So I think we're going to miss part of the evidence of what works and what doesn't. So, but there was definitely, I mean, there's a lot of, I can pinpoint you to a lot of studies that there were positive impacts. What was the problem? The problem is that the impacts were accruing over time. I mean, you start investing in a child, you start feeding the child, you don't see immediate results. You send a kid to school, you don't see immediate results. You have to wait for them to go into young adulthood in order to start seeing what the incomes, or how the incomes would increase of these children who were treated. So I think that's one of the things that we will lose from not having Coneval. Yeah.
Paso en este momento al español y al italiano contemporáneamente. Creo que nos detenemos aquí por el horario. Todos vamos a ir a comer juntos. Podemos continuar la conversación ante un plato, un plato lleno, exactamente. Lo que quiero decir es que se han puesto ya sobre la mesa los temas de las mesas de esta cátedra. Lo que hablaremos a partir de mañana en las diferentes mesas tiene que ver directamente con la magnífica conferencia que nos dio Graciela Teruel. Muchas gracias. Hablaremos de educación y COVID, hablaremos de medidas de migración, hablaremos de educación. En fin, los temas están y seguiremos hablando sobre estos. En este momento los doy ovviamente por concluida esta mañana, ma passo all'italiano perché vorrei concludere ringraziando particolarmente alle persone che lavorano dietro le quinte, che fanno veramente possibile questo, C'è qui Andrea Palumbo che rappresenta tutti quelli di comunicazione, della scuola di comunicazione. E con Marta Costantino che non è qui, ma lei ha fatto tutti i disegni e insieme abbiamo scelto, secondo noi, abbiamo attrezzato, elegimos el color rojo de la Ibero para todo el programa, come segnale, con lei abbiamo lavorato. C'è Simona Maraboli che rappresenta l'Ufficio Relazioni Internazionali, che ci ha facilitato tutto. E il tecnico che oggi non è Francesco, ma se ci dai il tuo nome per ringraziare. Sei sempre Francesco? Ok, grazie Francesco. Grazie veramente a tutti. Vi ringrazio di essere stati qua e vi invito ad andare al Tutto Storto, che è un ristorantino carino, semplice, ma dove si mangia bene. Comemos muy a gusto, nos vamos ahora todos a comer y a seguir la conversación fuera de esta aula. Gracias, muchas gracias.